So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special session this evening to celebrate Black History Month. My name is Alison Beale, and I'm the director of the University of Oxford Japan office. I'm also very involved with the British Chamber of Commerce in Japan. I'm on the executive committee, and I'm currently the vice president. So welcome, everyone, this evening. Tonight we're going to be we're having an in conversation session with current and former students from the University of Oxford. And I'd like to introduce the panel now. We've got a really fantastic panel of speakers. So first, Dr. Louis Ntenda, who is originally from Malawi and did his PhD, which we call a DPhil in Oxford, at St. Anthony's College in political economy, and he's currently in Japan and working and a poet here, and he's got a very exciting story which I hope he'll tell us all about, which relates to Malcolm X's visit to Oxford. Next, Chimdi Okpalauko, who is a second-year student at Pembroke College, and she's studying theology and religion. She's also currently the vice president of the Oxford African and Caribbean Society, and she's also a member of the university's new Race Equality Task Force, which I also hope she'll tell us about this evening. Warren Stanislaus he's a former student and a current student. He did his MA and MSc and MPhil in Japanese studies at the Nissan Institute at the University of Oxford, and he's currently undertaking a PhD in modern Japanese history, and also teaching at a university here in Tokyo. We look forward to hearing about the sort of things you're teaching, Warren, as well. And finally, James Nepal Singh, who's one of my colleagues on the executive committee of the British Chamber of Commerce in Japan. James read English language and literature at Keble College, and he's currently a senior associate at one of the major law firms here in Tokyo, and he's got a wide range of hobbies, which, again, I hope we'll hear about this evening. I'd like to pass over now to James, who's going to moderate the session. So I hope you all enjoy the session. Just to remind you, there'll be time at the end for everyone's questions. So if you have a question anytime, please put it in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Thank you. So over to you, James.
Thank you very much, Alison. So good morning from the UK, where I'm actually based at the moment, but I'm usually living in Japan, and good evening to people viewing from Japan. So Louis, let's start off with you. So could you please provide us with a brief background about Malcolm X and how you managed to get him to talk at the Oxford Union in the 1960s?
Well, that's a long story. So I think I would start by explaining what Malcolm X's frame of mind was when he visited Oxford in 1964. And you'll see why that's important. Because when he visited in 1964, he was a changed man. And two events had happened in 1964. His visit to Mecca in April and September, and his travels through Africa from July to November. These events had a profound effect on his religion, his politics, his views on white people and race, and his self-image. On religion, for example, he had completed his conversion from being a Black Muslim to embracing the Sunni Islam. On politics, he was no longer espoused to a separate homeland for Blacks in North America, because he no longer saw whites as incorrigible racists. He thought he could now share the same space because white America was capable of changing. He also believed that the white youth of America would be the engines of change, And he was convinced that they would be able to change their parents on racialism. Now, it turns out that our invitation to Oxford was not his first to a major university. He had in fact been invited by Yale University students in August of that year, of '64. And the letter I read was signed by John Kerry, the future presidential candidate and Obama's Secretary of State. And in that letter, John Kerry had said Malcolm X was the first man of color to be invited by the society in its history. Also that he was the first non-politician because all previous invitees had been senators and congressmen. And the reason he was being invited was that Malcolm, his views needed to be heard. And after addressing the political society of Yale students, he would meet other members of the university and talk with them. Now, to illustrate this, I would like to read a few excerpts from a letter he wrote when he was in Mecca. And this letter fetched over $100,000 last year at the Bonham's auctions. It is that important. Quote one says, "What I have seen and experienced on this pilgrimage has forced me to rearrange much of my thought pattern and to toss aside some of my previous conclusions." Quote two says, "During the past 7 days, I have eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, and slept on the same bed or rug with kings, potentates, and other forms of rulers, and also with fellow Muslims whose skin was the whitest of white, whose eyes were the bluest of blue, and whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and seeing that they regarded me as the same, as a brother, because their belief in one God, Allah, had actually removed the white from their mind, which automatically changed their attitude and their behavior towards people of other colors. This made them so different from American whites that their color played no part in my mind and in my dealings with them." Quote three says, "I do believe that whites of the younger generation in the colleges and universities, through their young, less hampered intellect, will see the handwriting on the wall and force the older generation to turn with them. This is the only way to white America, this is the only way white America can ward off the inevitable disaster that racism always leads to." And this is the frame of mind, he was in when I met him. Then the second point about his travels in Africa, you see, he had formed the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And its major platform was to, take Uncle Sam to the United Nations and International Court of Justice over racism as a crime against humanity. And he was given a platform where at the Cairo conference of the Organization of African Unity, where heads of state and government were meeting in July. And he gave a speech there. And he was regarded as the leader of the the diaspora, the African diaspora. After this meeting, he visited every head of state of independent Africa. And that's when I met him in Nairobi in October. He had visited Ethiopia, Julius Nyerere, Tanzania, and he had gone to West Africa, visited Ghana, Seda Senghor, and all these old names, Sekou Touré, yeah. So when I invited him, well, when we met, entirely by accident, of course, he had checked into the New Stanley Hotel, and I checked into the New Stanley Hotel the same evening. And by accident, we had decided to go to dinner at the same time. So we started talking, and I was very critical of the Black Muslims, but of course he had left them, and I knew he had left them. So when I invited him that, it would be important for him to come to Oxford, he already had been invited by Yale. And he had already also been told that his views were worth hearing. So he was not really surprised at all. So I think I will, leave it at that. So with perhaps two last points. During his, the debate, he said twice he had visited Mecca. He was very, very proud of that fact, you see, and that he was a Muslim. He was really, really very proud. And the second one was that, that was the age of revolution. And he said that the young people, would follow him in this revolution, So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Louis. There's a lot to unpack there. It's such a fascinating story. My first query is, why did he trust you? Because it sounds like you were a complete stranger. Why would he just trust you and take up your invitation to come to Oxford?
Okay, I think it's because I had shown a great deal of knowledge about Black Muslims. And I was also very critical about Black Muslims, because in his diary, he says, Louis talked a lot about BMM and Elijah Muhammad. So that I wasn't really talking out of ignorance, if I may blow my own trumpet.
Got it. And just in terms of the logistics, how did you approach the union and organize it? Because I understand the BBC was also involved as well.
Yes, it was my good fortune that the president of the Oxford Union for Michaelmas term, 1964, was Eric Abrams, a Jamaican Rhodes Scholar, who was so excited. And at first, of course, he didn't believe that I could invite Malcolm X, but I said, I'm a friend of Malcolm X, and I had his address, and he was determined to get Malcolm X invited before he left office. So that was why it was so rushed. I arrived in October, sort of first week of October. And so by November, everything was ready. And the BBC, had accepted to finance the project.
And what were the memorable moments of the debate that you remember today?
Well, yes, his quotation of Shakespeare, to be or not to be, he was unsure of something, he said, and the whole went, crazy over that. But that's, because, and that to be or not to be, he was unsure of something, to take up arms, because he was, of course, supporting extremism in defense of liberty. Is no vice. And to give these examples, and it was a very difficult one because he was defending someone, Barry Goldwater, a terrible man. Nobody could have wanted to support Barry Goldwater and his statement, but he did the best he could.
Thanks. And you mentioned that Malcolm was saying that the white youth of America will be the engine of change. To what extent do you think that resonates with what we saw, for example, after George Floyd with the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yes, of course, change takes time. And it wasn't even, in the 60s, there was the Flower Children, if you may, I can't say if you may remember, you're not there, but I do remember, they were sort of in California and so on, there were sort of Flower Children, peace to you and so on. There was an anti-Vietnam, sentiment throughout America. And that was significant enough. And, so one thing builds upon another, until people born out of out of those children developed also how shall I say, liberal views.
Got it. So going back to you did your PhD in Oxford. How did you end up in Japan, and how many years have you been in Japan?
Well, that's easy to answer. This year is my 40th year. I've been 40 years continuously in Japan. How I ended up is tricky. When I finished my PhD, DPhil, I went to Nigeria. So I spent 6 years teaching in northern Nigeria. And from northern Nigeria, I went to teach at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So I was 5 years in Hong Kong. But I wanted to go into industry. I wanted to experience business, the business world. And I met somebody from Japan. And I came to Japan, and he introduced me to one of the leading companies who were trying to expand their business overseas. They wanted to open branches in Korea, Middle East, and so on. They were in the oil and gas industry. So, and they needed, of course, English, someone who could write letters and, visit, these, who could write letters. And that's how I came, I ended up there. But I worked for 3 years. And then somebody in JICA said, they wanted, also some person from the developing countries to train the Japanese volunteers. And they persuaded me to move, and my company released me, and I worked 10 years with JICA. But then JICA moved their headquarters, not the JICA, the Japanese Training Institute, moved their headquarters to the countryside. And I didn't want to go to the countryside. And my old company took me back. And that's how I ended up. After retirement, I continued working for my old company in post-retirement in the Japanese style.
And you write poetry now, do you, in your retirement?
I write poetry, yes. It's
fantastic.
It's
excellent. And for the people watching at home, don't forget you can post your questions in the Q&A section. Thanks ever so much, Louis. I'm sure there'll be a few Q&As coming in your way. So moving on from Oxford past to Oxford present, welcome Chimdi from Oxford. See, it's grey and rainy at the moment now. So firstly, what's your heritage?
Yeah, sure. So well, my parents are Nigerian, but I've grown up in Britain, in London specifically, all my life. So yeah, Black British.
Excellent,
Yeah.
great. So I hear that you're on the new Race Equality Task Force for Oxford. Can you just tell us about that and what your role is and what the actual task force hopes to achieve?
Yeah, sure. So the task force was set up roughly this time last year, so November 2020. And essentially it's a accumulation of students, stakeholders and staff in the university from different backgrounds to basically aim to build a wider range of activities because as some of you guys may be aware, Oxford is a collegiate system, so colleges do their own thing and then the university kind of oversee it. So essentially the Race Quality Task Force aims to try and kind of bring more colleges together under the university and just push forward for change. How we did this over the year was through open events, interviews, focus sessions to basically accumulate loads of research that we could then put forward to the council and say, this is what we found out, and these are the kind of key points of things we want to push forward. I specifically, because I'm the vice president of the ACS, I sit on the student element, so I advise mainly on the student experience of students, of the student experience. So things that we cover is like undergraduate access, which is a big thing. But other divisions cover things such as staff diversity, which is a big thing that's overlooked sometimes. So that not only just the recruitment of diverse staff, but also the retention and progression, which is a main thing. Even looking at the social and well-being support of college students and acknowledging that that needs to be an additional layer to keeping students at Oxford and staff. And yes, we've gone through the initial stages of research and presenting to the council, and that went really well. And now we're in the consultation phase where if you're on a Race Equality Task Force, if you're a student or a member of staff at the university, you can basically read all the research we've done and offer your thoughts. And that closes in December, and then that will lead to then the final stages, I guess, of presenting to the council what we think are the next steps and basically making sure that we get race equality in the university.
Got it. So just from my understanding, Oxford's got, is it 38 colleges? And they're kind of autonomous, is it 38, 8-ish?
They're building more, so
Oh,
I
great. So it sounds like the colleges have a bit of autonomy, and it sounds like your job is to just to see what they're actually doing and kind of level the playing field to get the best bits from say one college and share that knowledge and make sure everyone else is doing the same thing.
Yeah, essentially, because I guess the issue right now is the university can say one thing, but because colleges have autonomy, some colleges are making more progress than others in this sphere. Some colleges can make two steps forward whilst others are making 10. So this is really just to encourage all colleges to start pushing forward and to almost provide a streamlined approach to everything that makes it easier to implement such progress across the university.
Got it. And how effective do you think it will be? I know it's early days.
Yeah, I think it's been great so far. I think this is a like a great step in the right direction, acknowledging the fact that there is different experiences at Oxford and some experiences are harder to go through than others. So I think the Race Quality Task Force has been great for that, and also just highlighting things that we kind of I guess overlook. One thing I guess personally before even joining that overlooked was just staff diversity. It's something that you kind of become accustomed to. So having that on the agenda is really important, and all the other things that we're gonna like, having official policies to deal with racial harassment. It's all quite exciting stuff. So fingers crossed, especially after consultation of having others put in their input, it's going to be a really great step for Oxford in just addressing some key issues.
So I met up with some current second and third year students at my old college doing English because I studied English. And one thing that kept coming up was COVID. How has that affected Black students at Oxford?
Oh, COVID has, well, I think definitely it would be important to start. COVID has affected all students. I think with Black students in particular, so from my experience in speaking to my friends, undergraduate and postgraduate level, I think it impacted us because at this point in time, you realize the different layers that we kind of go through. So not just obviously racism, but obviously classism and the different barriers that we have when studying here. Earlier this year when there was the lockdown, obviously nobody was allowed to return to university, but for many students, having to share a bedroom with five of their siblings or like three of their siblings, or not having like even just a study space in their home, was obviously a great challenge. The Oxford workload isn't the easiest, and you need that kind of your own bubble in order to really thrive here. So I think that was a main barrier of being able to get students back into Oxford so they can basically study and keep moving forward with their academics. So, for instance, the African and Caribbean Society supported students in writing letters to their college to basically allow them to come back. So that was a big barrier. Also, financial side of it. So the university were great in starting a COVID financial hardship process, so you could apply for additional funds of having to stay in Oxford during the lockdown, and because once you were here you weren't necessarily allowed to go back until the government changed their policies. So that element of it, and also I guess the element of being lonely. A lot of our black students are international students, and I have friends, for instance, who haven't been able to return back to their country of origin for months, so they haven't been able to see like family and friends, so that was a big thing as well.
Got it. You mentioned the African and Caribbean Society. Can you just tell us a bit more about what it actually does?
Yeah, sure. So African and Caribbean Society, I guess our main slogan is "We're more than a society," and we basically just aim to support all students of African and Caribbean descent in the university, from undergraduate level to postgrad, through career support. So we have a lot of corporate sponsors, and also non-corporate sponsors as well, who offer opportunities for our students, to welfare, to events, so events exclusively for African and Caribbean students, and providing a safe space, but also just a platform for them to speak to each other and to meet other students. Because I guess it comes back to one of the issues, which is that some colleges are more progressing more than others. So some students, it can be quite isolating to be just in their college. So it's a really nice space to have everybody in the university from different experiences and different countries come together and just really just pioneer everything they're trying to do. So yeah, that's the ACS in a nutshell.
Excellent. And what's your role in that? Because I hear you've just been appointed with a new position.
Yeah, so in my first year, I was junior sponsorship and careers officer, and in this year, I'm the vice president. So that's a privilege that I hold this year.
Congratulations. And my final question is a really difficult one. Where do you see Oxford in 10 years' time from a black student's point of view?
Oh, I think in 10 years' time, definitely more of us. I think that's a great first step. Um, the statistics don't lie; we're still underrepresented. However, I think there is a lot of progress is happening at a very quick rate. So hopefully, in 10 years' time, you'll be able to walk into a college and see, a lot of black students, and not just any random college, most colleges. That's my hope anyways. And it also just a lot of unity and cohesion, and just really celebrated. That's what I really hope Oxford will look like in 10 years' time. A lot more of us and celebrated and all as one. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Chindy. So yeah, looking back at when I was at Oxford, I did English, and everyone does their final exams in the same room. And from my memory, I think I was the only non-white person there out of about 300 students, but I think that's changed, like you said, quite rapidly as well. So feel free, everyone, to ask questions for Chimdi. We'll come back to those later. So moving on to Warren. So Warren, hello. So are you based in Japan, but you're doing a PhD in Oxford, and you're now in Tokyo?
Yes, that's correct. A bit confusing. So I did my master's at Oxford in 2011 to 2013, and I've returned now for my DPhil study in 2017. And yes, but I'm based in Tokyo at the moment.
Excellent. And what's your heritage?
Yeah, so it's I like to describe it as kind of that I embody global Britain in a way, or the British story. So, I mean, I was born in Southeast London. On my paternal side, my father was born in Trinidad and Tobago. His parents were from Grenada and Carriacou, and they came over to the UK with the Windrush generation in the 60s. And then on my mother's side, she's mixed Nigerian, Swiss, German. And so in a way, I guess through my body, it represents that story of Britain's colonial past, its history of immigration, and now a vision of a multicultural future. So that's quite is how I'd explain my heritage.
So we've got a connection. So my parents are from Trinidad. My dad's parents, his father is Indian, his mum's from Grenada, so he's black, but he's got an Indian surname. And my mum's very mixed, South American, black, everything. And I found out I did a DNA test and 3% Finnish as well. So I don't know where that came from. So yeah, but we say we're like Callaloo people. Callaloo is like, you probably know, the Trinidad curry, which is just a mix of everything. So it's great. So thanks for that. So I hear you're doing a course, you created a course on Afro-Japanese encounters, and you're teaching that in Japan at the moment. Can you just tell us a bit about that, please?
Yeah, and I guess I'll use the question that I gave to my students in the first class as a way of describing the course. So I asked my students, so I teach at Rikkyo University in Tokyo, and the student body is Japanese. And I asked them, what are your impressions of Black Japanese encounters? What comes to mind? And then a lot of the responses were, for example, like the famous tennis player Naomi Osaka, or they would write down like Black Lives Matter protests, because there were some in Tokyo. And it was quite consistently coming up with these themes that were centered on the present day individuals or events, or issues of kind of racism and tension between Black people and Japan. And I think one of the reasons why I set up this course was to show that actually there's been a long history of Black Japanese encounters, going back to the 16th century with the African samurai Yasuke, throughout the 19th century with Matthew Perry and his Black ships, and he also had Black bodies that he brought on those ships as well. Going into the 20th century, famous African American intellectuals like W.E.B. Du Bois was talking about Japan as a champion of the darker races, and then going into the post-war period, in the middle of the 20th century, when you have the Black GI soldiers living in Japan, marrying Japanese women, and so many instances of connection, kind of belying those narratives of separation or only present day encounters. And so the main purpose of the course was to show and demonstrate all these interactions that has happened in the past, happen today in the present, and to also imagine what the future could look like as well.
That's quite interesting. What you're saying is that Black culture is entwined within Japanese culture, and it has been like that for years. So to what extent is Black History Month relevant to Japan? Because it kind of relates to UK Black History Month, where Black people are saying we're part of the history, we are part of the history, so we shouldn't be really seen as another. To what extent is that relevant for Japan?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, it's relevant in the sense that I guess there's quite a large African American or larger African American community, expat community in Japan, and so in Japan, when you think of Black History Month, then it would be February and centering on the African American experience, and I wouldn't say that when it comes to, for example, the Black British experience, that Japan is too familiar of that in general. So, for example, one thing that I always like to do is when introducing myself to Japanese people for the first time, they're often interested to know where I'm from. And then I ask them to guess where I'm from. And the UK will never come up. It would always be America, Brazil, a country in Africa somewhere, France, Canada, anywhere else but the UK. And I think that's quite reflective of the image of the UK in Japan, that is kind of limited to the afternoon teas, Harry Potter, the Harry Potter Hall in Christchurch, as we've all probably visited before as well. The Black British story isn't a part of Japan's image of what the UK is. And so in terms of, I mean, me trying to make it relevant to Japan, I was able to work with the British Embassy last year and produce a package of content to introduce this kind of vision of a multicultural Britain to a Japanese audience. I was really quite excited to do that. For example, I worked with my students to produce a Black History Month Spotify playlist so that the Japanese audience could, even if they can't go and research more in English, they can just listen to the music and feel the sound waves of Britannia or Black Britannia. And then we also produced an article in Japanese which introduced not just sports personalities and entertainers, but also Black academics, politicians, and show the diversity of Blackness within Britain as well. So I think that was how I've been trying to make Black Britain relevant to Japan.
So all sounds great. So one thing I noticed when I first went to Japan is how much Black culture is celebrated. Like there were so many Black bars, soul bars, jazz bars. And also you see Japanese guys with dreadlocks because they love reggae culture, but it doesn't come from a place of appropriation. It seems it comes because they want to pay homage to the culture. And conversely as well, I know lots of Black people are really fascinated by Japanese pop culture, especially anime, for example. How do you explain that? Why is there so much interest cross-culturally between the two cultures?
That's a really great question. I think, and I'll just, for anyone in the UK, I'll advertise my upcoming talk. This Friday, it will be 6 p.m. UK time, where I'll be introducing about Black British music and how Black British artists have kind of looked to Japan to generate their countercultural voice within the UK. But I think one of the things that I will just mention to keep it short is, and I'll refer to one of the figures that I talked about earlier, W.E.B. Du Bois, the African American intellectual and writer, where there's lots of instances where Black people throughout history have faced racism within their own countries, looking outside of that space to another distant culture for sources of liberation. And I think within, like I said, within the late 19th century, early 20th century, that was very much present among African Americans. And then in more contemporary context, in the Black British music that I'll be talking about at that conference, we can see a similar trend happening again, where Black Britons are looking to Japan as this space of liberation to express their own identities in different ways, and also oppose racism within or racial oppression within their own nations and geographies as well. So I think that was how I'd characterize that Black interest in Japan.
That's interesting because, as you know, one of my hobbies is producing techno house music. So if that kind of sounds like the techno guys from Detroit creating the Red Planet, there's this kind of illusionary place where everyone can be free, and it's quite similar to, it sounds, Black British music's perception of Japan. It's quite interesting. We've got some questions for Louis. So one question is, what advice would you give to Black students at Oxford University who are trying to navigate their way through some of the challenges they may face as Black students? Quite a deep question there.
That's extremely deep, because my Oxford experience is 50 years, more than 50 years old. And there are 2 points I would like to make. When I went back to Oxford in 2000, there was St. Anthony's anniversary year. And Kirk Green, a fellow of St. Anthony's, had, and History Dawn had sort of made statistics of African students at the university from, post-war until 2000. And he discovered that, in fact, that there were more African students in the 60s than in the 90s. And in fact, in the year 2000, when I was there was practically no undergraduate Black student. The reason he gave, of course, were two, that when in the 60s, as Africa became independent, more countries became independent, they developed their own universities. And the students, of course, did their first degree there. And the only reason they would leave would be sort of for postgraduate studies in, say, in Oxford. And the second one was that the fees had grown so high that it was impossible to get for private students to come to study for a first degree. So what was the question again?
It was what advice would you give to Black students trying to navigate their way through the challenges they may face at Oxford?
Well, my views may be out of date because, when I was there as a student, in the 60s, there was obviously also great, racism. And the landladies weren't familiar with Black students. They used to say that we use too much water. I said, they're so clean. They use so much water. They're always bathing. That was a criticism. And I was president of the Africa Society, Oxford University Africa Society. In fact, I wanted to ask Chimdi whether the Africa Society is the same as the African Caribbean Society, a predecessor, a successor. Perhaps there are now two societies. And we used to send a white student first, a Black student first to a landlady who would say, oh, there's no vacancy. And later we would send a white student, and there would be a vacancy. And we would, of course, report them to the proctors to say that that landlady discriminates against students. But I was there as a graduate student rather than an undergraduate. I worked extremely hard, but at the same time, I also played hard. So,
so moving on to that, it sounds quite juicy. How would one play in the 1960s in Oxford? Was it nightclubs or what kind of entertainment was it?
Discos. It was the age. It was the age of disco music. Because all the other things of dinners and Gaudi are the same now, but discos seem to have disappeared.
Yeah, that's true. And what would the African Society do? Would they organize their own African discos? Because now, I don't know if you know, but in dance music, African based beats are quite popular at the moment. Was it a similar kind of vibe in the 60s?
Oh, yes, the same. It was usually Nigerian and Ghanaian music was very, very popular. But we didn't organize our own discos because, it was played everywhere. Everywhere you went, you could always sort of, find Nigerian or Ghanaian music to dance to.
A question just come up. So back in the day, were they called bops, and are they still called bops today?
Bops?
Yeah, BOPS. like college discos and things?
No, I never
Okay.
heard that word before.
Okay, Chimdi, is it bops now? Is that what people do?
Yeah, it stands for big organized parties, and yeah, very still much a thing.
And what bops going at the moment? Do you guys organise bops?
Yeah, so it's like so big now that there has to be there's a specific person on the JCR committees or on so the Junior Common Room Committee or the MCR to organize them, so an ENTS rep, and they're usually themed. There was one literally yesterday at my college, it was Halloween themed. There's been some that's been like the Y2K theme, so like the year 2000s. I think funny enough, Lee, there are still some disco like themed bops as well, so we do still try to relive your era. So yeah, they're usually themed and really good fun, and you can go to other colleges bops as well, which are really cool.
So Louis, you might want to come down to one of Chimdi's disco bops in the
I,
future.
I would like to do that very much. Please invite me next time I visit Oxford.
Yeah, I used to DJ in Oxford as well, but not bops in the nightclubs, the local nightclubs. But yeah. So Chimdi, moving on to more serious stuff, we've got a question for you. So you talked about access. What do you think is needed to get more Black applicants to get to Oxford? And are there any good initiatives that the university is doing in order to get more Black students in the undergraduate body, and what more could be done?
Okay, yeah, very good question, very loaded one. I guess I'll break it down. So firstly, what do I think is needed to get more Black applicants to Oxford? I think just having them here in the first place. I think a barrier to a lot of students applying in the first place is just not seeing themselves here because they don't know they can do it. So I think that's why societies such as the African and Caribbean Society, so ACS, and also Africa Society as well, also for the postgraduate body, is really important to kind of demonstrate that actually you can come to Oxford despite your race and really thrive here and do really well. And it's a fun experience. It isn't just like Louis said, all work hard. It's a work hard, play harder mentality, and it can be done despite your background. So I think that's really important in order to get more Black applicants here. Good initiatives that the university do. In terms of the university, so the ACS actually hold an annual access conference every year, which is partially funded by the university, which is I think one of the biggest initiatives. I wouldn't say there's initiatives per se directly for Black applicants. It's usually a case of integrated in other access initiatives such as Oxnet. There's the Thinking Black initiative that is in collaboration with Pembroke College, so my college. Usually some of the ones which is like more targeted for ethnic minority students, they're affiliated with specific colleges because colleges deal with different elements of like the UK, and that's kind of how access is organised. In terms of what more could be done, I think definitely, and this is something that we've discussed as part of the Race Quality Task Force, more funding, and I guess more support as well. A lot of these initiatives are student like facilitated at times. So the annual access conference, for instance, is all organised by our students on the ACS. And at the end of the day, we're still students, trying to navigate our student life. So sometimes it can be a burden, especially when there isn't as many of us as we'd want. So, like organising these things. So definitely, I guess, more funding, more support. But we're getting that, and hopefully, as time moves on and we get more students here, the burden becomes less, and we can share more of the workload when it comes to access initiatives. And the university will provide us with more funding. So yeah, that's access. My views on access. I hope that answers the question.
Very well answered, and there's a lot to pack in there as well. But it sounds like your vision of seeing more Black students in 10 years' time might be fulfilled with those initiatives, which is great. A question for Warren. I don't know the answer to this, but I'm guessing Warren may do. So someone is curious to know if Oxford led the movement and played an active part in establishing Black History Month in the UK.
I'm a big fan of Oxford, but I highly doubt it. Yeah, I would assume that would be grassroots led by people within the Black community within the UK. I don't know the answer, but I would put a lot of money on that.
The second part of the question is, how is it celebrated in Oxford within colleges?
Yeah, I mean, obviously being based in Tokyo now for the past a couple of years now, I'm a bit out of the loop, but as far as I know, and I think maybe Chimdi can offer something after, is that there's kind of lots of lectures around Black History Month happening on campus. I think there's like an official Black History Month lecture, and then other colleges do different such events and stuff like that. So we're starting to see a lot more opportunities to learn about Black life and Black history at Oxford as well. I would say that's probably been happened. So since returning to Oxford during my DPhil, rather than when I was there 10 years ago for my master's. So I think that's probably a big difference.
Chimdi, have you got anything to chip in there?
Yeah, so actually this Friday we've got a Black History Month showcase, which is run by the ACS, but it's in Pembroke College. So Pembroke College has been helping with that process. So I think it's, like Warren said, it's quite a collegiate thing as well. So even though the university do have their like communications that come out on the like Instagram and social media platforms, it is again like up to colleges to pioneer that as well.
Thank you. Moving back to Louis now, we've got a question for you. So looking back at your experience in the 1960s and everything that's happened since, including the Black Lives Matter movement, do you feel optimistic about the future in terms of eradicating racism, or are things just repeating themselves and progress is too slow? It's another deep question for you there.
Oh, I'm very much an optimist myself. Because, how shall I put it? I've still kept up with Oxford. You know, particularly, I'm still a member of St. Anthony's. I receive letters from, you know, St. Anthony's every year. You know, in fact, every term. And I think there have been an increase in both student body, in the student body and the staff body. For example, St. Anthony's now has African fellows, which was something that, you know, you could never have thought, you know, in the 60s. We were just students, yeah. But, you know, African fellows are teaching African history, you know. So that is extremely, you know, a big development for my college at least. And I'm sure the other colleges too have African fellows. So it really means, you know, that one can go all the way to the top. One of these days we'll have a Black Vice Chancellor of Oxford University.
Chimdi, or maybe Warren.
Yeah.
So Warren, throwing that question to you, how optimistic are you about things in the future?
Talking about Oxford University, or just more
generally, I think.
More generally, I think one reason to be optimistic is we're having these conversations now. I think before last year, to be able to speak openly about the Black experience was something that didn't really happen. It was more of a hidden transcript, you could say, in the sense that people of color were backstage talking about their experiences, and then when going on the stage, putting on a show that to a performance in a way. Whereas now, kind of that backstage narrative has come to the forefront, and we're having these discussions. So that's one thing to really be positive about, I'd say.
Thanks. And related to that, what's your experience like? I'm going to ask two things to this: being Black in Japan and being Black in Oxford.
Yeah, this is I'll relate a story that I often tell to illustrate this. I was in Oxford for a welcome week. I won't name the college or anything like that. It's relevant. I was in there for a dinner, and we were just introducing ourselves to the other students. And then I talked about how I've been living in Japan for over a decade. I speak Japanese. I've done lecturing in Japanese. I'm studying a DPhil in Japanese. And then the person I was talking to 10 minutes later, after I've said Japanese about 100 times, then asked me, oh, are you studying African studies? Like your friends over there. And they were also Black students who weren't studying African studies, and neither was I. And so in a way, it was though, even though I'm speaking, all that was being read or heard was my skin color. And those kind of unconscious biases happen fairly often. Now, those types of things do happen in Japan as well, where people will say, oh, you're Black, so you must be good at basketball and rapping and all of this type of stuff. But then when I introduce who I am, then they tend to take me at my word. In a way, I'm giving a chance to speak and kind of show my identification of who I am. And then that is now me. What I've said is now me, rather than the kind of surface level skin color thing. And I think that's quite a profound difference. And that's how I would kind of differentiate my experience or negative experiences within Oxford. I don't want to say that's the characteristic of the Oxford experience in any way, but those are some of the negative experiences in comparison to some of the experiences you have in Japan.
Got it. Chimdi, same questions to you. So are you optimistic about the future of things in general, and what's your experience, your Black experience like being in Oxford?
I think my Black experience has been an interesting one, particularly with the pandemic as well, which caused a lot of disruption in my first year. So I think that's almost kind of another layer that was another layer to overcome in itself. I think, like the others, I'm definitely optimistic about what's coming yet. Like Warren really rightly touched upon the fact that we're now having these conversations. There aren't just conversations that when you speak to your Black friends at other colleges, you're just ranting on about, oh, this porter did this or this person did this. Like, they're actually conversations that we now feel comfortable going to our college about and saying, look, I felt like this was very much unconscious bias or very racist. Can we do something about it? And it's something that colleges are now becoming comfortable dealing with, putting in place things to change it. So for instance, there was an incident at my college and we spoke so we have a forum now called Black Pembroke, where Black students, and Warren's actually on it as well, get together and discuss these issues. And it was raised that, you know, there are these biases within some members of staff and they've dealt with it. And I think, say, given maybe back to Louis' time, wasn't necessarily as strongly as it is now. So I think I'm definitely more optimistic that slowly and steady, as we start dealing with these things, and the university takes a stronger stance on racism and celebrates culture more, I think things will definitely move in the right direction for us Black students here.
Few things on what you've all just said there. So we're having a conversation, and we are literally having the conversation between us now, which I think is quite historical as well. It's the first time in the BCCJ's history that we've had an all-Black panel. It just shows there are Black people out there who are British, going back to Warren's point there. And yeah, because of those conversations, I do think things will change in the future, hopefully for the better, which is all great. Got an interesting one. I'm going to throw this at Warren. So it's a question about the Turing program. Do you know much about it?
Turing it's the program. Replacement for the Erasmus.
Erasmus, yeah, it's quite an interesting one. So what obstacles do you see that might prevent UK Black students from utilising the new Turing program funding in order to successfully access opportunities to study in Japan?
I think that I'd say two things. The first is just having knowledge of programs in general. I think that's so important. And that's obviously not limited to Black students, right? That's going to be for, you tend to find that people from certain types of schools, whether independent schools or something, will have more access to knowledge about scholarship schemes, which may not actually be there to benefit those students, ironically. So yeah, the first thing is knowledge of it, and that's where I guess we come in as role models in a way, and providing that. And then the next one, specifically in relation to Japan, and this I think would link to things like Japanese studies. It's like, well, for Black students, why go to Japan? And I think, and again, this kind of intersects with socioeconomic issues as well, where you find that a lot of Black students or a lot of people from maybe working class backgrounds or something tend not to choose humanities subjects or subjects which are seen as not practical. So maybe even their parents or teachers are saying you should go into STEM subjects or business, and then you'll be able to get a job after, right? And so people tend not to go with Japan studies or like yourself, James, like English. And so I think that may also link with this as well, is giving people confidence to say, look, you can do any subjects that you want, and you have loads of opportunities after as well.
Kind of going off topic, but that's such an interesting point that I really want to home into, because I mentor quite a lot of young Black students at the moment, and like you say, they are being pushed down the law degrees, the business degrees, and they're fiercely competitive. And I honestly think those students would be better off doing something that they're actually passionate about. Like I was passionate about English, so I did that and then moved into law. And you're obviously going to have a better chance of getting into these difficult subjects if you're passionate about them as well. So why is it that Black kids in particular are forced down these traditional competitive routes of non-humanities subjects? I've got my own thoughts, but I'm just interested to hear what everyone else thinks here. So maybe Chimdi first, and then move to Louis and Warren.
Yeah. I think from my experience and speaking to friends, it's a case of our parents come from a generation where they see it's quite linear. What you study at university directly correlates to what you're going to do later on in your life. And when you think of almost the top jobs, it's like everything in the corporate sphere, investment banking, lawyers, and that's what guarantees you a stable income, right? That's what they think anyways. And I think because of that, you're almost pushed down this route, because it's like, if you do this, then it means you're set, like you're going to be good for the rest of your life. Whereas me, myself, I think I'm similar to you, James. I study theology, but I'm a training contract offer holder at one of the top Magic Circle law firms in the UK, arguably the world, but haven't studied law. So it's just, I think it's a case of, as time moves on, just speaking to our parents, I think, is the best thing, and just encouraging them to actually see that it isn't this linear route to top jobs, or top jobs not necessarily being the be all and end all. You know, you can do something as long as you love it. Surely in this day and age, happiness is over money or anything. So I think it's just definitely that linear mindset is something that is just being overcome gradually, but I think needs to be overcome a bit quicker, so you don't have students doing the wrong thing. Because just quickly, my story actually, so when I first time around applied to university, I actually applied to law because of those pressures, and then had to actually step back and be like, no, I very much want to do theology. That's what I've been planning to do. But in order to keep everybody happy, you just do law, because that's what everybody wants you to do. And I want to be a lawyer, so it makes sense. But actually it doesn't. Like, you can do theology, you can do English, you can do whatever subjects you want, and then life will work itself out. And I think it's that faith till life will work itself out is something that our parents don't necessarily share the values we do right now.
You mentioned faith there, and that step that you took to move from law to theology, I don't think people at home appreciate how much of a big, huge leap that was, because there's so much, because I've felt this myself, there's pressure and there are expectations, and it's almost like you're rebellious because you're not living up to other people's expectations, and you feel like you're disappointing people. But I think you did the right thing. Is what makes me happy at the end of the day, because that will make other people happy as well. So Louis, was it different in the 60s? I mean, for Black students, were they pushed down similar routes of doing vocational subjects?
No, not really. For example, in my case, I did, perhaps because my parents, or my father was a teacher, I'd always wanted to be a teacher. And as I sort of climbed up the educational ladder, I wanted to be a professor. That's why I sort of ended up doing a PhD. But in those days, there, as you know, what Kirk Green found, that there were a lot more students doing BA at Oxford than more students than in the 90s, and later almost zero in the 2000s. Very few of them were actually doing professional courses. There was Kweku Galbraith studying ancient Greek classics, because that was the age of classics. You learned ancient Greek, Latin, and very few were studying law, but most of us were really in humanities. So, and perhaps you wanted to be professors.
Thanks. And Warren, question to you. Why do you think those pressures are there?
Yeah, I mean, just I guess from my personal experience, I really took a long time to decide to go back to do the DPhil and pursue a career in academia within the field of Japan studies, because, and it took my mum to say to me, like, look, Warren, you've got one life. This is your passion. Go for it. And I'm glad that I had that support. Otherwise, I would look out at the situation, the landscape, and see no one like myself. I've done a data search that I'm the first Black British person within the UK across Japanese studies to have obtained a master's research degree and pursuing a DPhil in Japanese studies, right? And so there's no kind of image that of anyone before me doing this. So how can I imagine that I can do it? But then I guess you've just got to have, that's why support is so important. And seeing people like Louis, who's graduated from St. Anthony's, a college that I was at during my master's with his DPhil, of course. I mean, that's inspiring in itself, and that gives me hope today. So I think those are some of the reasons why I would say is that having a role model is so important.
Thanks, everyone. There's a question to me. So I did English. The questions are, what was my experience doing English from a Black perspective, and has the course changed? I had a quick look at the curriculum yesterday, and I don't think the course has changed. And my issue with the course, seeing this in retrospect, having studied it 20 years and seeing the kind of remnants of what that does in societies, it kind of marginalizes Black people and puts them in a box. So there's the phrase post-colonial literature, which I'm not quite happy with. And it's not seeing Black writers being in a dialogue with great writers of the past and how they intertwine with each other and how they're interconnected. And it goes back to what Jim was saying, that there's no, colleges kind of do their own thing, there's a bit of autonomy. So I think what we're seeing is some colleges are really tuned into these kind of issues and they're reading text from a racial point of view, but then some other colleges aren't because they're just completely out of it. And my issue with that is when it trickles down into the wider society, Black people are marginalized, they're seen as kind of the other, as opposed to, like we said before, being part of the culture and actually creating the culture and being part of the dialogue. So what I would like to see for Oxford is for the course to change, to actually recognize that for a start and just make it less old white guys that people have to study from centuries ago and to see what's going on in the world now, because otherwise I think we will always be marginalized. Question for Louis now. So what's the biggest takeaway you got from Malcolm X?
The biggest take?
Yeah, the biggest takeaway.
Actually, I was expecting a different question, but anyway, meeting him has actually changed my life. So I've been associated with Malcolm X over these 50 years. And I've sort of appeared in all sorts of situations, and I think, the most interesting one is being mentioned in the proceedings of the National Assembly of Namibia, in my meeting Malcolm X. But how shall I put it? I enjoyed, I learned, quite a lot from him, in the sense that the courage of saying what you believe in. Because at this debate and so on, he was saying the most unpopular things. And yet he said them. He didn't care whether, the people sort of accepted or not, but he believed in what he said, whether they were popular or, in fact, very unpopular situations and unpopular, views. And he, of course, blamed, he said, it's the press, creates these images, and he did not accept those images of him. And I think that's real leadership quality.
Thank you. I think these will be our final questions now. So
Something else,
there's
something else I wanted to say about Japan, though. And that is, I think, my success in Japan has been due to having graduated from Oxford. Everywhere I went, if people say, "Oh, he's an Oxford graduate," their attitude immediately changes. And the fact that, in 1981, I was taken by a company which had 60% of the Japanese market is because, they said, there's this black man with, from Oxford, with an Oxford, degree, and said, "Oh, right, he's all right, he's all right." And I was given responsibilities and, and a real job, to open branches in Korea, in the Middle East and in India, just because I had graduated from Oxford. And when I met, when we went to Mitsui or JGC or these big companies, my head of department would bring me along. And of course, you'd say, "Oh, he's my Oxford man. And that opened doors, certainly in Japan, because, at the time, there's a sort of hierarchy of universities, like, okay, there's Todai, there's Kyoto and so on, but there is Oxford, there's Harvard. So life for me has been rather easy in Japan because of my Oxford background.
Got it. Thanks for that, Louis.
Yeah.
So Chimdi, I think this is going to be the final question. So who are you inspired by and why?
Oh wow, it's such a hard one.
Well, you've got Louis here. I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, and I think this is it, and I think this is the point I'll probably make, in the sense that my inspirations are usually just people in my day-to-day life. Like, so Louis and Warren, in Black Pembroke meetings, I look up to you because you're just pioneering what you're doing in your field. Louis, hearing your story today, literally amazing. A lot of the girls in the year above me, so in third year, a lot of the black girls in ACS, they inspire me. I think it's just people who just like can take things and just turn it into something really beautiful and just don't care about it, and tenacious and audacious. Those are the people who inspire me. So yeah, just people in my inner circle. Yeah.
Excellent. What about you, Warren?
Before I say that, I just want to second what Louis was saying about the impact of Oxford in Japan. That's so true. For anyone who's interested or who knows already, you should see what Malcolm X says. What do you call a black man with a PhD outside in other places? But that's, yeah, you can look at that later. Anyway, people who inspire me, on the I'll say two people, continuing with the theme of Malcolm X, he showed me the intellectual black man, and when going beyond those stereotypes of the ghetto thug, hypermasculine, all those things. That was so inspiring to me, obviously reading his autobiography. And then the second person is Bell Hooks, the Black feminist author from America. And she told me about myself in her books. Yeah, so look up Bell Hooks if you're interested.
Love that. Thanks, Warren. And Louis, is there anyone else apart from Malcolm X who inspires you?
Black person?
Yeah, or Japanese.
Okay, that's a good one, but give me a little, go to someone else while I'm thinking.
We'll come back to you. So just to plug, Warren is the poster boy of the current issue of the BCCJ Acumen magazine. So the online version should be up now, so you'll see Warren center stage on the front page. I'm going to say who inspires me. So my parents, by living in Japan, I realized how difficult it is to actually come to a foreign country with 2 suitcases and actually establish a life for your family. And my dad as well, he got an OBE because he's a teacher, he's a retired head teacher, but he used to advise the education minister in the 90s on when they were rolling out the GCSEs, and he was quite a pioneer. He was the only black person on that committee. When we went to Buckingham Palace, we were the only black people there, so he's a massive inspiration. So Louis, does that leave you enough time to come up with your inspiration?
Well, there was my director at, Japan International Cooperation Agency. I was teaching at the Training Institute, Japanese volunteers, and there was, the director there who had been himself a volunteer in Kenya and so on, and he had come back, and I think Africa had changed him. And he wanted, Africans to teach. That, he filled the institute with Africans from Ghana, from Madagascar, and I think he sort of convinced the ministry, that it was important that volunteers should be taught by people from the countries where they are going to, so that they should start looking up to them, because if they left, if they hadn't met people at that level teaching them, and they went over there, they would think that they are going to teach the locals, and they would have a superiority complex. And his idea was that they should drop this superiority complex by being taught by people from the developing countries where they're going to. I really liked that idea. But he also lived his talk, because he had all his students educated in African high schools, secondary schools, secondary schools in Kenya and in Zimbabwe. And later on, they went to University of Kent and something like that. And then he himself, when he retired, he went to live in Africa. So that was somebody who believed in, Africa had changed him. And he had decided that he also wanted his children and everyone else to follow, and, I find that, as I say, very inspirational, and yeah.
That's beautiful. And on that note, I think that's a good time to stop this discussion. But thank you ever so much to the panelists. It's been a great, powerful conversation. And thanks to the people at BCCJ for organising it and the University of Oxford in Japan. So on that note, take care. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.